Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining me. This is Psych 92, Developmental Psychology, and today we're going to talk about Chapter 5, Middle and Late Childhood. So we will start with physical and cognitive development. Do you see the slide change? Just want to make sure. Somebody let me know.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so we're going to talk about changes in brain maturation, positive effects of sports, reasons for lack of participation in youth sports, and kind of current trends. This is a stage where a lot of kids, because their growth slows down, they start to experience some weight issues. Okay, when we talk about middle and late childhood, we're talking about the ages between 6 and 11 years old. So here's a little picture of, 2 to 5 year olds, and then you have 6 to 11 year olds. There's a lot of differences that happen, right? So 2 to 5 year olds, early childhood, think preschool, 6 to 11 year olds, you're older, more mature, start to, growth slows down. And so we have a lot of different changes that impact us. Kids at this age really love to play. Because of their maturity, they're better at playing, more organized sports. So not just one-on-one interaction with other kids, but now there starts to be more organized ability to follow rules as well. Obesity epidemic has hit this stage, unfortunately, and so we'll talk a little bit about that. So from 6 to 11 years old, kids tend to grow about 2 to 3 inches in height, and each year gain about 5 to 7 pounds. So you can see that the growth in terms of getting taller slows down, but in terms of weight, it actually picks up quite a bit. This is the age when a lot of times girls are taller than boys, so it's kind of an awkward stage. Growth spurt begins around 9 years old in girls and 11 in boys. One thing to keep in mind too, that middle and late childhood, we say 6 to 11, but remember it ends when the child hits puberty. And so it's kind of a fuzzy ending. It ends when a certain physiological event happens, right? So here in terms of motor development, kids are faster, they're stronger, they have good balance, good coordination. This is why it's, sports becomes a really big component of lives, right? Also, you can tell a middle and late childhood mouth because they start losing their teeth. In terms of motor development, really good, right? They are very precise now. So art classes become really prevalent. And cognitively, they can pay attention to details. So this is a really fun stage to introduce them to different types of art. Also, so the muscle strength and lung capacity increase. They can actually engage in strenuous physical activity for quite a while time. So both their gross and fine motor skills improve. Remember, gross motor skills have to do with your arms and legs, the large limbs, and then fine motor skills usually have to do with what they can do with their hand. We do see that there are differences in motor skill performance in terms of girls versus boys. Sports like gymnastics, for example, need to start early. They start earlier for girls because we want to catch them, get them really while they're flexible before puberty hits. In terms of boys, on the other hand, they actually encourage a delay in something like gymnastics because they become stronger when puberty hits. So there are differences in terms of the types of sports that are encouraged or ideal at certain stages, depending on whether the child is male or female. So in terms of obesity, this is old data, I'm going to get updated data, but in 2015, 1 in 3 kids and teens were overweight. That's really shocking. This is supposed to be the prime of people's lives, right? So we really want to instill good eating habits at this stage. So they're both environmental behavior factors. Of course, there's also a genetic component as well. And when we talk about environmental factors, part of the issue is that kids are overscheduled, right? 25% of children have no free time physical activity. 1 in 4 kids have so much going on that they can't even just go to the playground and play for a little while. So that's really a problem. When kids and teens are already overweight, their life expectancy actually is reduced by 5 years. So there are a lot of repercussions to this issue that's going on. In terms of physical aspects, how do we define it? Well, doctors like to look at what we call a body mass index, BMI, and that's simply a ratio of height to weight. So when a child goes to the doctor, they will weigh them, right, on a scale and then look at how tall they are. If their BMI, is above the 85th percentile, so there are ideal BMIs based on somebody's age, then if they're above the 85th percentile, they are considered overweight. If the BMI is above the 95th percentile, then the person is considered obese. Caveat, the BMI does not account for muscles, like for muscle density. So muscle weighs more than fat. So if a child, is very muscular, they could be at a BMI above the 85th percentile and yet not have very much fat. So that's just something to keep in mind, right? You want to understand that muscle weighs more than fat. And so even if somebody two people weigh, 150 pounds, depending on their muscle density, that could look very different. So what we're concerned here about are kids who are above the 85th percentile and aren't there because of their muscle density. It's just because of their weight. The problem with obesity is it is associated with a host of illnesses, insulin resistance, so they become diabetic, inflammation. They can start having knee problems at a very young age, and even cardiovascular disease. So this definition of overweight versus obese is true for both kids and adults. Any questions? Okay, so obesity affects not only one's physical self, but also cognitively, there are impacts. Oftentimes, the reason people become obese is because they're eating too many foods that have processed sugar and saturated fat. Well, our bodies were not designed to be taking that in. And so what's happening is there are a lot of very high correlations that people who eat, inordinate amounts of processed sugar and saturated fat have lower relational memory skills. So in terms of just trying to make connections and remembering that's worse for them. They have a weakened blood-brain barrier in the brain. So in your brain, there's something called the blood-brain barrier, and it's meant to be a filtering process to keep anything, toxic away from your brain. Well, if what you're ingesting has a lot of unnatural substances, that actually impacts that blood-brain barrier. So overweight kids have poor executive functioning. Executive functioning has to do with your ability to plan and execute, different activities. Is sort of the CEO of your brain. They have problems controlling impulses and delayed gratification. We'll talk a little bit later about what, delayed gratification is. Any questions? Right, so we have obesity that impacts us physically, cognitively, and now psychosocially. Kids who are considered obese have higher levels of depression, risk of depression, low self-esteem. Oftentimes they become subjected to bullying and teasing. And, there was even a phrase called oblivobesity. And that is when people, don't recognize or won't explicitly say that a child is obese or overweight. We have that now, especially in this society. We call it fat shaming, then there's skinny shaming, there's, body positivity is important. But it is also important to recognize that being overweight or obese, they do have negative repercussions, right? And so it is not an ideal situation to be in. And the idea is what we should really be promoting is health, not focusing on a specific weight, but health generally. So a lot of, so that oblivobesity really affects parents in that they don't want to recognize their child is obese, and problem with that is that it may prevent them from seeking help for their child. So in terms of, okay, let's say you do know a child who is overweight or obese. Um, the last thing you want to do is put them on a strict diet because they're growing, right? They need nutrition. So it's better to encourage practicing inhibition. Maybe don't bring in junk food into the house, right? As parents, you have control over that. Model good food choices better than working, so a good diet is important, but also increase physical activity opportunities for the kids. You can make it something fun. So parents should avoid shaming and guilting their kids. That's how you end up with eating disorders, right? And really not focus on diet, offer good food choices, maybe just eliminate the junk altogether and really focus on physical activity. That's a better choice than body shaming or anything like that. So sports, as I mentioned, a lot of benefits to it. What do we find? Research indicates that kids who are active in sports have higher levels of satisfaction of their family. If any of you participated in sports as a child or have a child in competitive sports, it is a family activity, right? Parents have to drive them, schedule, vacations around competitions, all those kind of things. So all of those actions actually bring the parents closer to the child and vice versa, because most kids will appreciate what parents are doing for them. So they tend to have better overall quality of life as well, improved physical and emotional development, better academic performance, and development of social skills. So there are many potential benefits when kids get involved in sports. We do see some differences in terms of how often kids are involved, whether they're, girls or boys. More girls, unfortunately, a lot of times in society, they're kind of discouraged from being physically active. And so you do see that more boys are active in sports than girls. So there are also differences in terms of gender, race, and ethnicity. How many times, this is also, I would say, a socioeconomic issue because oftentimes competitive sports are very expensive. And so you have people participating in them who are in middle and higher income brackets. And it's really great that more and more sports, organized sports, are offering avenues where kids, who are in lower socioeconomic statuses are also able to participate. So possible problems, well, especially here in Silicon Valley, parents tend to be thinking ahead, right? Sometimes sports aren't even joined for fun. It's like, what can you put on your resume or your college application? So that becomes problematic. A lot of times kids drop out because it's not fun anymore. When parents overemphasize get this, win this award or beat everyone in this competition, that could really decrease the kids' interest. So again, as I mentioned, we do recognize that not all kids have access to sports, and we try to find avenues. More and more community-based sports are available so that kids of all socioeconomic statuses can participate. So another component that becomes really obvious at this stage is the venue of video games, right? So 25% of kids, so 1 in 4, count playing video games as exercise. That would depend on the game, right? There are definitely some games where you get up and you dance or you do the action. So I could understand that, but actually watching other kids play video games or just playing video games yourself, I would argue that that's not enough exercise. And it could even lead to some issues like carpal tunnel or anything like that. So you want to make sure that kids have a variety of different activities. It's not to say cut out video games totally, but they should have opportunities to actually get up, physically move their entire bodies, not just their hands, because that activity is important for them, even just getting more oxygen into their brain. Because of budget cuts, a lot of wonderful activities for kids were cut. Thankfully, recess remained and physical education remained because the government is aware of this potential for obesity and the long, the effects long-term in terms of if a child is obese. That being said, physical education is available, but the time has often declined in recent years. So hopefully, as lawmakers pay attention to the research, to the science, they will actually increase that time period again and find avenues where kids can really interact and be physical. So another component to understand in middle and late childhood is kind of the effect of sleep. So in terms of your brain, remember that when a child is born, the vast majority of brain growth, the big spurt, happens in the first 2 years. So here in middle and late childhood, the growth does slow down. You still have myelination occurring. Remember, myelination is when that fatty substance covers the axons of the neuron, and it helps increase processing speed. So pruning, in terms of synaptic pruning, continues. Remember, pruning is the idea of you use it or you lose it. So if you learn something and you don't continue to strengthen the synapses, the connections in your brain, you'll forget that you ever knew it. So that's true for language. It's true for even like skills, right? Building muscle memory is really important. What else happens in the brain is the brain pattern shifts. What you're looking at is a graph of alpha and theta waves. So alpha waves are when somebody is alert. And you can see as people get older, around 5 years old, it peaks. The alpha waves actually peak. Theta waves also peak around the same time, right? So looks like amount of activity that's in hours, about 9 hours. You can see that kids 5 years old really can engage in a lot of activities. And then it kind of slows down. So theta waves are the sleep-like brain patterns. So as people get older, their theta waves actually decrease a lot. Like how much time people spend in this sleep-like state decreases as people get older. So that would be a negative correlation, right? What researchers are finding is that this change in the brain patterns of increased EEG activity in the green, the alpha waves, and decreased theta waves actually indicate that the frontal lobe is developing much more and now coordinating other parts of the brain. So new capabilities because of this change, or not because, well, what this brain change indicates is that kids at this stage have better control and attention. They can now solve complex problems. We'll talk about, cognitive development soon, and also engage in explicit planning and self-reflection. So those are really huge capabilities at this stage. No longer little kids just playing, that wonderful innocence that they have where they're oblivious to a lot of the issues and problems in the world. 6 to 12 years old, we'll talk about it in socio-emotional stage. There is a huge shift in their focus. And because of this self-reflection, self-esteem actually goes down quite a bit at this stage. So in terms of brain growth, the frontal lobes become more developed. Remember, the prefrontal cortex, the frontal lobe is not fully developed until people are about 25, 26 years old. But that's not to say that it's undeveloped. It just continues to develop in that stage. So as the frontal lobes become more developed, there are improvements in things like logic, planning, attention, memory. Where do we see myelination? Often in the association areas. So that's where people can become more coordinated in terms of their motor. Their cognitive function also increases. So they are faster in solving problems. You give them a series of problems at this stage, they can solve quite a few. And this is why a lot of times we start to introduce math competitions and things like that. Another change is the hippocampus. So that's the part of your brain that actually stores a lot of memory. And remember, the hippocampus is one of the few parts of the brain where neurons continue to develop, which completely makes sense, right? We continue making memories throughout our lives, so it makes sense that the part of our brain that stores those memories, or most of the memories, continues to grow with us. And so as the hippocampus develops, there is easier transfer from short-term memory to long-term memory. If you recall, short-term memory are things that like right in the moment. Right now, you're listening to me. That's short-term memory. Unless you do something to explicitly try to remember the information I'm giving you, it's not going to go into your long-term memory. When we're in school, what we hope people will do is take that activity, the knowledge, what you're hearing, take that from short-term memory and put it into your long-term memory so that you can recall the information when you need to, right? If we only had short-term memory, progress would not be happening, or we would have to write it down each time and try to remember what was going on. So it's really important for all of you to know that when you hear information, when you're watching some kind of educational video, unless you are explicitly trying to put that into long-term memory, it will go away. All right, so overall, here's a summary of the physical changes: slowed growth rate, improved fine motor skills, improved gross motor skills and coordination, further brain development in your frontal lobes, and increased opportunity importance of sports and organized play. I'm going to stop this so that we can do another recording for the cognitive changes. Any questions though?